What's good, Chaotic Nation? It is your boy Chaos here. Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to talk about the Elite Four. Now, similar to how we did the champion video about which champion is actually real, I wanted to come up with something for the Elite Four as well, because I think they are interesting to discuss and to think about as well. Like a group of 4 of the most powerful trainers in the region, as they're claimed to be, could be a pretty cool, interesting theory to talk about or discussion to have, especially when we consider the ranking among the Elite Four members. Now, obviously, like Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Paldea offered a structure in their Elite Four members. Now, this is probably structured from the worst to the best, being the lowest level rated Elite Four member is the first one you face, and you work your way up till you get to the best one at the end. You see this in Kanto games, where Lance considers himself to be the final test and the ultimate Elite Four member. Now, potentially, there's a few ways that this could have been decided. They could have obviously battled each other. Now, this would be an easy solution to figure out who is better, obviously, because you attack one another with your Pokemon to see who actually wins, and the winner becomes slotted as the best. So I could see the Elite Four having a tournament within themselves to determine who's the best, and then you fight everybody, and however you score depends on where you get rated, and that would determine your order. I would see this as an unlikely possibility, simply because the way that some of these characters are laid out doesn't make sense for some of the other regions. Like, the Kanto's fine, but it doesn't make sense for, like, Will to be the worst Elite Four member in Johto when there's a poison type trainer and a fighting type trainer that come after him. Like, those are two types that Psychic is good against. It would make some more sense for Will to be able to beat them and to be a higher rated member. The other thing I thought of is, like, based on types. As we just were saying, it can work for Kanto, but the other regions, it doesn't work so well. Like, Lorelei's Ice type is weak to Bruno's fighting type, Ghost is immune to fighting, which is fine, and then Dragon is completely overpowered in Generation 1 according to everybody. So it makes sense that that would be the order of the Elite Four, but as I said with Will, it doesn't make sense because Will is a Psychic type trainer, and there's a Poison and Fighting, which are two weaknesses of Psychic types that are later on. We see this also in Hoenn, because Sydney is our first Elite Four member, and he's a Dark type trainer, which would be super effective against Phoebe's Ghost type Pokemon. And similarly, Glacia as Ice types, that would do well against Drake. Same thing in Sinnoh. Why is Flint so far back in the list? He should be further up because he does not beat Bertha's Ground type. And there's the whole thing of Aaron being the first Elite Four member being Bug, and Lucian being the last and he's Psychic. How does that work out if it's based off of typing? So it could be for Kanto, maybe not for Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Paldea. We don't know. It could be completely different. One of the likely ways I think that it is based on status. So this could be you were a previous champion of the Pokemon League. Maybe you've been in the league as a league member for a long period of time, and as the people who are further back in the list go away, you end up being a part of this. Now, this works for everything, really, except for Johto and Sinnoh and Galar. Okay, it doesn't really work that well, but it could potentially work. I mean, it could potentially work. It just depends on how you see things. One of the examples I was going to use is Kanto, because despite Agatha being obviously older than Lance and being a trainer who was training with Professor Oak, Lance has been a champion. Agatha has not, as far as we know. So maybe the champion status gives Lance a higher priority bid. But also, if you watched my video about Lance being the champion and the champions of Kanto, we don't know when Lance actually became a champion. So at this point in time, if we're playing through the games of Fire Red, Leaf Green, Red, Blue, Yellow, or Let's Go, Pikachu, or Eevee, Lance could not have been a champion at that point in time, so that doesn't make sense here either. It just depends, I guess, on what each league values as the characteristics for a strong trainer. Maybe they have a certain priority of experience, battle experience, character, personality. Who knows what they are going for when they are creating this league. But I like to think that these couple ideas that I've shared have been helpful for me to understand how a league might be formed. Actually, an interesting part about the Kanto Elite Four is that in Generations, it shows the Elite Four in a room similar to that you see in Black and White and Black and White 2, where any of the champions can be faced at any point in time because they're all standing on those little balconies outside of their rooms waiting for a challenger to come in. So it could be an opportunity for Kanto to have been in a place where they once allowed anybody to come fight them in any order. And this could also mean that at some point, because the Kanto region doesn't do this anymore, that they found a likely order for trainers to progress throughout the league. Maybe many of the trainers started with Lorelei because she seemed like she'd be the easiest person to deal with, then went to Bruno, then went to Agatha, and then went to Lance. Maybe they just had a preference in going in that order, and so they actually decided to implement that when they made the league and restructured the area so that you had to go through in a linear pathway rather than choosing your opponent. I can't speak for any of the other regions because we haven't seen them in that sort of fashion, but if you're looking at Generations, it does show this, and it could potentially be a way that some of the leagues are structured as well. So that brings me to the question about, what about the other leagues? What about anything from Generation 5 to Generation 7? What are the leagues set up like? Besides being open and letting you challenge them in any order, is there the potential for a strongest trainer, or what would the order potentially be for those regions? I think that's a very interesting conversation. So I've done a little bit of looking up some information, and I think I'm prepared to answer a few questions about those. So let's see what they might look like. Obviously, in this list, we can't conclude the Galar region because Galar doesn't actually have an Elite Four. You do the Champions Cup, you do the Gym Leader rematches, and then you are fighting the champion. So there is not a set pathway to do an Elite Four. There's not even 4 Elite Four members. They're just gym leaders who are repeating themselves. Obviously, Larry's a weird exception case because he uses a different team. He's different. He has even a different typing. So Larry is an exception to this rule that he can be both a gym leader and an Elite Four member at the same time. I think Unova is probably the easiest one to begin with, mostly because it's the first game that we have an open format for that, but it's also got a really good indicator of how the system could work. Unova is kind of easy because Marshall actually is known to train with Alder. This is said in dialogue in the game, which makes him a really good candidate for being the strongest member. Obviously, you're not going to just train with any random person, you're going to train with somebody who makes you stronger. And Marshall being on the level of the champion, or at least good enough to contest with him in scrimmage matches, makes him a strong contender for the best Elite Four member. If we go to some of the other factors I've talked about, like age or typing or strategy, Grimsley makes sense for the third one in the Unova region. The other trainers would not be doing so well against him because they are psychic and ghost type specialist, well as Grimsley is a dark type trainer. He also is definitely older than Chantal and Caitlyn by a lot, especially since we see him in Alova only a few years later. So he is pretty old at this point in time, and definitely just looks a bit younger than he is actually. If we look at strictly on age for the last two, Caitlyn is obviously the youngest. If you watch my timeline video, we see a moment where Caitlyn is 14, and we see a moment where she's in the Elite Four, where it's guessed that she's around 18 to 20. So she is definitely one of the younger trainers who only completed her journey a decade ago at max. Chantal obviously is a little bit older with an established career as an author and a writer, so it would make sense that Chantal would be after Caitlyn in that fact. Also, if you look at typing, Chantal has a better typing matchup versus Caitlyn than Caitlyn does against Chantal, which definitely makes the league better in that order. So the Unova order would be Caitlyn first, Chantal second, Grimsley third, and Marshall as your final Elite Four member. What about the Kalos region? So Kalos has 4 really unique trainers, and again, you can face them in any order, so it doesn't really matter how you decide to go fight them or how you decide to do the challenge. If we look at some of the other Pokemon regions and their Elite Four members, it makes sense that our Dragon type user here in this region would also be the final Elite Four member. Draznav's probably the oldest of these characters. Maybe Wickstrom gives her a little bit of contention, but if we're going to just go based on all the criteria I have, and Dragons being a really powerful typing, it makes sense that Draznav would be the final Elite Four member. We did mention Wickstrom, and I think Wickstrom actually fits a really unique role in this sense, because Wickstrom has a knightish personality. He comes from the chivalrous and path of a knight, which in my opinion would make him the primary person you would fight in the Elite Four, because a knight would be somebody you send out first in battle to deal with your opponent, rather than sending out your most important person to deal with it. I think Wickstrom would take this opportunity to become the leading charge of the Elite Four, and thus would be the first person you would have to fight in Kalos. Now, when we get to typing and age and strategy for the other two, it kind of makes sense that Seabold would be a little bit stronger than Malva. Seabold does seem a little bit older. He obviously has a type advantage being a water type specialist versus a fire type specialist. We also know that Malva has a little bit of another career in broadcasting and working for Team Flare, so it doesn't make sense that she would be as ready to do her duties or as strong because she's working on something else. Where Seabold, despite the fact he's more like a chef kind of thing, he would probably have more experience in training his Pokemon and being with his Pokemon, which would make him a stronger trainer in the end. The Kalos order would then be Wickstrom as your first challenge, then Malva, then Seabold, then Drasna. Now here's where things get a little bit interesting because Alola has never really had the potential for a league at this point. So it makes sense that there's not really an established order at this point if you go back to what I was saying about Kanto, where they at one point had a place where you could challenge any of them in any order. So maybe they just haven't come up with their preferred order yet, maybe they just haven't decided how it's going to be structured yet. This really feels kind of like last minute put together kind of thing, like you're turning in your final paper 5 minutes before the deadline. It's very thrown together and makes it so hard to capture what we're going to be doing. There is one thing we can grab onto though with the Island Challenge aspect of these games, and that is the Island Challenge requires you to fight the Kahunas on top of Mount Lanakila at the end of your journey to become an Island Challenge champion. Therefore, the Kahunas are given a higher priority placement than non-Kahunas in the ranking of the creation of the league. Which means for Sun and Moon, the two Elite Four members that are Kahunas make the most sense to be the strongest trainers. Whereas Hala is not an Elite Four member in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which does change the order of the games a little bit. So for Pokemon Sun and Moon, obviously Hala is the oldest, and he has likely been Kahuna for longer than Olivia, which would put them in the orders of 4 and 3 respectively, as both of them are Kahunas and outrank the other two who are not Kahunas. Acerola is young in these games as well. She is inexperienced, and we know Kahili has at least completed the Island Trial Challenge and has become an Island Challenge champion. So I would feel more comfortable putting Kahili just a little bit higher than Acerola on this list. Your order for Pokemon Sun and Moon would be Acerola, Kahili, Olivia, then Hala. Sun and Moon is a little bit different from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon because Hala is no longer an Elite Four member. Hala was never asked to be an Elite Four member in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon because it's a different timeline. The Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon League instead gets Molayne, a Steel-type specialist. If we're going to follow the order from previously, we got to keep Olivia at the end because she is the only Kahuna of the Elite Four at that point in time. Therefore, she is the strongest and would be put last. For similar reasons to the Sun and Moon Elite Four, I'm going to keep Acerola in the first slot just because she is the youngest, probably the most inexperienced of the bunch, and we don't really know how she got there in the first place, so she's probably first. Now, Molayne and Kahili are a little bit difficult to place because they are so similar. I think both of them have completed the challenge at some point in time, but it's obvious from the experiences with Kahili that she has been a traveled and traversed trainer, which makes her really experienced in not only the region of Alola, but in other regions, giving her a lot of battle experience, which might prove beneficial in her role as an Elite Four member. So in this case, I'm going to give the edge to Kahili. The other thing you can note is her team has counters for the Steel typing, if we were going to go that far. Obviously, a fire type form of Oricorio would deal with that well, and she also uses Hawlucha, which would help out with dealing with Molayne's team. Therefore, I think she might be a little bit better than Molayne in this sense and would be a higher rank. So the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon order for the Elite Four would be Acerola, Molayne, Kahili, then Olivia. Well, those are just some of my thoughts on what the Elite Fours might look like if they were straight and streamlined and put into a specific order. I'd be interested to know if you would change anything of any of these orders based on your own experience playing the games or your own experience as a trainer, or maybe you have some other thoughts for criteria that I didn't think about, which would be really cool for you to leave in the comment section down below. I would like to have your thoughts in the comment section down below to help me understand what maybe I've missed, or maybe to help somebody else who's watching this video to help understand a little bit more about what's so important about these Elite Four members. Of course, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on my other socials. I'm on Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Discord, and I have another YouTube channel, Invisible Corporations, where I do non-Pokemon content. There is Pokemon content on the channel, it's just not me doing it. But you can go watch some of my other things on the channel over there, and I would appreciate you checking that out. Of course, I would appreciate your comments here. I would appreciate you guys watching all the way through these videos. So if you have made it this far, give me a little thumbs up in the comment section. I'd love to see those, just that you watch the video all the way through. I would appreciate that a lot, because right now watch time is the biggest factor in getting us to partner. So please help us out there and share this with your friends if you want to help us out some more. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed, and until next time, my name's Chaos. I'm signing off. Stay safe, and as always,